All right, today we're diving into the blueprint for what was supposed to be a brand new, perfect society. We're talking about a single document that laid out a massive colonial experiment, Georgia's Charter of 1732. This wasn't just about grabbing some land. No, this was about engineering a colony from the ground up. And the central idea? Well, it was pretty wild for the time. Just picture this. The plan was to go into England's infamous debtors' prisons, find the worthy poor, and just give them a complete do-over, a fresh start, an entire ocean away. A whole society built on the idea of a second chance. But you know how plans go. As we're about to see, the grand vision that was written down in the charter and what actually happened on the ground, well, they were two very different things. The story of Georgia's founding is just this fascinating clash of good intentions and, let's say, harsh reality. So let's get into what this charter actually said. So, what even was this charter? Well, it was signed by King George II himself, and you can think of it as the ultimate rule book. It laid out, in detail, exactly why Georgia should exist, and just as importantly, exactly how its colonists should live their lives. This was not a list of suggestions. It was a rigid social contract. The entire project really was built on these three big ideas, these three pillars. First, philanthropy. The goal was to help people in need. Second, economics, to make money for England. And third, defense, to act as a shield protecting the other British colonies from the Spanish down in Florida. These were the official goals of the guys in charge, the trustees. So let's start with that first pillar, the whole philanthropic dream. Because honestly, right out of the gate, we hit a major puzzle. If this was supposed to be a colony for debtors, where were all the debtors? And this is where the plan just completely falls apart. The leader, James Oglethorpe, he was genuinely moved by the awful conditions he saw in English prisons. But between politics and just the sheer logistics of it all, his main vision never actually happened. Not a single debtor was ever released from prison to go to Georgia. Not one. So if it wasn't debtors, who were the first Georgians? Well, they were skilled workers. Carpenters, bakers, farmers, people who were drawn in by a pretty amazing deal. 50 acres of land, a full year's supply of food, and all the seed they needed. This wasn't charity, it was a golden economic opportunity. All right, so let's move on to the second pillar, economics. England didn't just want another colony, it wanted a profitable one. And they had a very specific shopping list of goods they expected Georgia to start churning out, which we can actually remember with a pretty simple acronym. Now, this was all driven by this big economic theory called mercantilism. The goal was super simple: make the mother country rich. Colonies like Georgia were basically seen as giant farms and resource depots. Their whole purpose was to supply England with valuable stuff it couldn't grow or find at home. And that brings us to the famous WRIST crops: wine, rice, indigo, silk, and tobacco. England was desperate for these things, but especially silk. In fact, the trustees were so obsessed with silk production that every single colonist was required by the charter to grow mulberry trees, because that's the only thing silkworms eat. And here we go again, another huge gap between the plan and the reality. Despite that mulberry tree rule, the silk industry was a total bust. The wine industry never got off the ground. The soil and climate just weren't right. Now, rice and indigo would eventually become huge moneymakers, but that was way, way after the trustees were gone. The economic dream wasn't quite dead, but it was clear it wasn't happening under their original rigid plan. Okay, so the charity mission missed the mark, and the economic plan pretty much fizzled. But what about that third pillar, defense? Well, this is where the Georgia experiment found its one huge, undeniable success. See, Georgia was designed from the start to be a buffer colony. Its main job really was to be a military shield. It was there to protect the very rich and very important colony of South Carolina from any Spanish attacks coming up from Florida. It was a human wall, and that wall was about to be tested. And that test came in a war with, I kid you not, one of the weirdest names in history, the War of Jenkins' Ear. It all started when this British sea captain, Robert Jenkins, showed up in Parliament claiming that Spanish sailors had boarded his ship and sliced off his ear. He'd pickled it in a jar, showed it to everybody, and the public outrage just exploded into a full-blown war. The war itself was really touch and go for a while. First, Oglethorpe led an attack on the Spanish fortress at St. Augustine, and it failed. So in 1742, the Spanish hit back hard, launching a huge invasion of Georgia's St. Simon's Island. But right there, at the Battle of Bloody Marsh, the scrappy Georgian colonists and their allies smashed the invasion force. And the result of that battle? It was decisive. After that victory, the Spanish threat was basically neutralized for good. Georgia had done its job. It had fulfilled its most critical strategic mission. The buffer held. Now, while they were busy fighting off the Spanish, the colonists were also fighting against something else: the incredibly strict rules that govern their everyday lives. You see, the trustees had a very specific utopian vision for their society, and they were going to enforce it. Let's break down these rules, because each one had a pretty clear purpose in their minds. Slavery was banned because they wanted a colony of small, independent farmers, not massive plantations. Rum and other hard liquor were outlawed to keep everyone working hard and not getting lazy. And you couldn't sell your land, and it could only be passed down to your sons to make sure every plot of land always had a man on it, ready to fight. And the list of banned things just kept going. Liquor dealers and Catholics were explicitly forbidden. The charter even banned Jewish settlers. But here's a fantastic little twist of pragmatism. A medical crisis swept the colony, and just then, a ship of Portuguese Jews arrived, and they had a doctor with them. Oglethorpe totally ignored the rule, let them stay, and that doctor, Samuel Nunez, is now credited with saving the entire colony. But as you can imagine, all these well-meaning rules started to cause some serious friction. A group of colonists, who actually called themselves the malcontents, started pushing back. They argued that banning slavery, rum, and the sale of land was strangling their chance to get rich. They looked next door to South Carolina with its booming plantation economy and felt like the trustees were holding them back. Which brings us to this central paradox, this kind of failed success at the heart of early Georgia. The philanthropic dream? Never happened. The big economic plan? A total bust. And the strict utopian rules? They just led to discontent and rebellion. By almost every measure, the trustees' grand experiment was a failure. And yet, the colony itself survived. So that's really the fascinating question, isn't it? The trustees' vision completely fell apart, but the colony hung on, and it actually succeeded in its most important mission. It really makes you think about our ideas of success and failure. The blueprint was a bust, but Georgia fulfilled its purpose, laying the groundwork for everything that came after. It's just a powerful reminder that sometimes history isn't written by the grand plans we make, but by the unexpected, messy realities we're forced to adapt to.